Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're excited to be here and talk about this important program. This is the first time I've worn a lapel mic, so I'm pretty excited about that. The presenters today are me, Andy Pfister. I'm a senior associate with Development Strategies, a St. Louis company I'll talk about in a second. Big shout out to Jacob. He really put this together. We talked about 6 weeks ago. He's like, what do you think about opportunity zones? I said, well, we could put a session together. He said he could put people in the seats. I agreed to it. Maybe that was foolish, but here we are. Sean Sullivan's here to help talk about the details and mechanics of the program, as is Chris Hurst, talk about some of the topics that have come out of the IRS guidance that was recently released. My name's Andy Pfister. I'm from Wichita. I moved away to go to college at KU, go Jayhawks, and then I moved to St. Louis for 9 years. I moved back in 2011 because I wanted to help move the city forward with some of the experience I have, and also families here. In the meantime, I've had 3 kids, so I've really had learned how to juggle a lot of different things. Development Strategies is based out of St. Louis. We have a national practice, and what we do is very much defined by the name of our company. Development and implementation is near-term projects. That's real estate and design, market analysis and strategy, what's possible on sites and districts and downtowns. We do long-term thinking as well, and strategies for communities, strategies for districts. We work in a lot of neighborhoods around the country that are opportunity zones or impacted by a lot of the issues they face. So this was a natural fit. We wanted to think more about this program and help just put the information out there here in Wichita. I live and work here. We also have an office in Philadelphia, and St. Louis is our headquarters. Like I said, we do work around the country. This is just a sample of some of the types of projects we work on: corridors, districts, downtowns, and cities, and regional economic impacts. I also, we're wrapping up working on the Places for People project in the city and a couple other things locally. So today we're going to talk about opportunity zones. What is the opportunity? I'm going to say the word opportunity 63 or 64 times, but don't shoot me. I'm going to talk about kind of an overview of the opportunity zones in Wichita, what the conditions are there, and kind of what the opportunity is. Potential impacts, what could happen if this is implemented correctly. And then I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Sean to talk about why we're here and the mechanics of the program. And then I want to get into how other communities are preparing or already implementing this program, and conclude with some thoughts about how our city and region can proceed in a strategic way to maximize the impact. So to start, what is the opportunity? This is a quote from a policy expert who's been following this program closely. The broad objective of this incentive is expanding economic opportunities for places and people left behind. And it cannot be achieved by the market and outside investors alone. Cities will need to act decisively if opportunity zones are to engender inclusive, sustainable growth that is truly transformative for each city's economy, rather than just a large, disconnected individual transactions. And that's talking about the need for partnerships and working together to maximize the impact at a local level. Just a broad overview, and again, Chris and Sean will get into the details. This was part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017. This part of the act had really strong bipartisan support, which is, as we know, kind of non-existent right now. There are 8,700 zones in the US, and really the crux of the mechanics of it is a capital gains deferral, which will be explained more in a little bit. It's intended to spur development in low-income urban and rural communities. It's a highly flexible program, but there are some challenges because of some of the timelines and other details that they've issued to date. So what is a capital gain? Let's say you purchase something, either business, real estate, in 1990. You sell it this year. You purchased it for $1 million, you sell it for $2 million, your capital gain is $1 million. that's the amount that you would get taxed, capital gains taxes, and that's the amount you can put in these opportunity zone funds. So that's really key to understand about this program. It's about capital gains. It's not just about capital. It's the capital gains from a sale of an asset that's subject to capital gains, which could be a business, stocks, real estate. What people are saying about the program, these regulations are going to free up and unlock a lot of capital that has been sitting on the sideline waiting to get involved. One estimate is there's $6.1 trillion of unrealized gains that just companies are holding on to so they don't get taxed. This could be unleashed. With such broad definitions from the IRS and Treasury Department, it is important for state and local and government officials to engage with investors to identify projects to drive the greatest economic impact. So there's a need for partnerships to get the most impact out of the project. Another thing was the goal was to make these funds accessible enough so that it wouldn't only be large institutional players that can investigate and participate, not investigate. It's a national initiative, but it's really a local effort. So localities have a lot to do, and local investors can do a lot with this as well. One more quote here. The thousands of designated opportunity zones are diverse as the United States, with urban and rural areas represented from coast to coast. One of the questions that we have now is whether investments will share that diversity or concentrate in a few geographies that might be more ready to unleash the capital than other places. The greatest promise of the policy is if investors find their way to the less trodden geographies or more creative assets, such as investments in rural infrastructure or small businesses. Some of the potential impacts, just from my perspective in thinking about this, is it has the potential to unleash a lot of capital. And in doing so, if people might sell real estate holdings that they haven't sold because they don't want to pay capital gains tax. So there can be a lot of movement in the real estate market. Opportunity to form partnerships that aren't in place now that will help us move forward. It can really accelerate projects that are ready to go or close to ready to go, where you have site control, you have a development plan, you have your zoning approved and all of that. We could locally leverage the focus areas that have come out of Project Wichita, address some of the challenges that are being brought to the forefront from the Chung Report. We can use it to support business growth. That's one of the intents. Or we can really use it to reinvest in our neighborhoods that we haven't invested in for 50 or 60 years. So where are the opportunity zones in Wichita? They're the yellow outlined census tracts here. It includes around Wichita State, north of Wesley, kind of the north industrial area down north of downtown. It includes all of downtown and the west riverfront, the two neighborhoods south of downtown, and a couple southeast neighborhoods over around the golf course in St. Joseph there. Just a little more detail about these neighborhoods. Opportunity zones have actually, based on these estimates, gained a higher proportion of population. The population's growing faster in the opportunity zones than in Wichita as a whole. A lot of that has to do with the investment in the core, a lot of the new housing we've seen. Projected growth is still, and this is just a projection, but opportunity zones are projected to grow more than the city as a whole. Again, kind of based on the investment we're seeing in the core. Median household income is 60% of what it is in the city of Wichita in the opportunity zones. Some of the census blocks have very low median household incomes, which we know there's some challenging neighborhood conditions in some of these areas. In terms of share of households in poverty, in the opportunity zones, 30% of households are in poverty versus 16% in Wichita. Part of the guidelines for identifying the opportunity zones, there are generally low-income, summer distressed neighborhoods that need different approach to help stem that tide. Unemployment rate is double that of Wichita in the opportunity zones. In some areas, it's over 30%, which is staggering. Are there ways we can use this program to better train people and connect them with jobs? Because there are a lot of businesses and jobs in these areas, which is also an important point of, the program is you can use opportunity zone funds to invest in businesses and capital needs of businesses, equipment, and so forth. So can it help grow businesses that are there or attract new businesses to the zones and therefore attract jobs to the zones? Employment concentration. Most of the opportunity zones do have decent access to job centers. Downtown, of course, but Wichita State, there's a job center, hospital there, the hospital there. So there's opportunity on that front. Commercial permit activity, this is just permit value. It might not be development value because we don't always put the development costs on our building permits. But we've had a lot of activity downtown in the last 6 years, which is great. This is hospital-related development, but otherwise there's not been a lot of activity in most of the opportunity zones. And is there a way that we can use this program to change that? Last one about opportunity zones. We mapped life expectancy at birth. I live in Woodlawn Village over here, and just by my kids being born in this area, they are likely to live 10 years longer than if they're born in an opportunity zone. That's just staggering. And that's something we can start to address. There's the social equity side of this program. So just another quick comparison. Only 6.4% of the city's population is in the zones. The median household income, like I said, is 64% of the city's zones. So these are the areas with challenges, but there's an opportunity to inject new capital with some creative projects and deal making. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Sean to talk about the mechanics of the program.
Hi, I'm Chris Hurst. I'm a tax lawyer with Foulston Siefkin. I've been with the firm 36 years. We have been involved with Opportunity Zones since about May of this year. We have 4 or 5 clients that either are actively in an Opportunity Zone, have already established a fund, or are in the process of doing so, ranging in size from about $3.5 million to over $100 million. So we've been interested in this topic for a while, and I'm happy to be here. My purpose at the moment is to just make sure before we get into any detail, and we aren't going to get into much detail, although we'd be happy to talk about questions later, you at least remember 3 things. I hope that you will have, at a high level, 3 things when you leave this. As Andy said, this is a tax thing. This is not a Department of Commerce thing. This is not a housing and urban development thing. This is not state of Kansas allocating resources that you have to apply for, like many other tax things. It's purely an income tax thing. Everything is found in the Internal Revenue Code. All the regulations and guidance will be IRS guidance and regulations and tax forms. Purely a tax thing, an income tax thing. Already kind of mentioned, the primary benefit of this is actually not tax deferral, although that's helpful. Everyone likes that. Don't have to pay gain for a while. You might be able to eliminate some of the gain altogether. Like that too. The real thing that's motivating the investment and the interest in opportunity zones is none of those things. It is the potential to never pay tax on the appreciation in your investment if you hold it long enough. You invest in an opportunity zone and you hold it 10 years or more and you sell it, no tax. You're completely tax-free on the appreciation. And that's where the appeal is really being focused. It's not so much on the deferral, it's not so much on some minor reduction in the gain you already recognized, it's that. So I mostly want you to remember that this is a tax thing. It's mostly about deferral and maybe elimination of appreciation. The second thing is, you could not design a more flexible investment program. There's no minimum dollars that you can put in. If you have $5,000 of capital gain you want to invest in a fund, it applies to you. If you have $100 million, it applies to you. No minimum investment, and there's no third-party compliance. One of the problems we've seen with things like new market investments and low-income housing is there's so much regulation and so much compliance-related work to be done, it's intimidating for many investors. That's not the case here. You'll have to fill out a tax return and you'll have to get some tax questions answered, but the IRS isn't looking over your shoulder and telling you what you have to do. It's pretty much going to be driven by traditional business models of corporations and partnerships and LLCs. Especially the last point, we're mostly seeing LLCs, and in that context, we're seeing developers taking carried and promoted interests, preferred returns, everything you've seen before in the context of investment. Still applies, works really well in this context. And the thing you don't hear so much is this isn't for everybody. Notwithstanding, we're all excited about it, and there's some opportunity for tax benefits. It doesn't apply if you don't have capital gain. You could put your money into an opportunity zone fund without capital gain, but you'll get no tax benefit out of it. It'll just be an investment. So you've got to have it, and it has to be recent. It has to be within the last 180 days. You can't extend that. So the clock starts ticking immediately. A second requirement that makes this a little more restrictive is you have to be in an active trade or business. What does that mean? Well, a lot of people like to invest in passive real estate or have a management company run it for them, or a triple net lease. That's not going to work here. The active involvement in the business, and it's in a specific targeted opportunity zone area, not just anywhere you might want to be. Two more important points on this slide, and that is not only does the deferral benefit end at a specific time, whether you like it or not, 2027, but under recently released IRS guidance, your ability to eliminate that 10-year plus holding period, that appreciation, you've got to 2047 to do that. This is not a lifetime investment. This is not an heirloom asset for your kids. Your gains will be recognized or the benefits will expire at some point in time. Again, doesn't mean it doesn't work for you. It might be fabulous, but it is not the answer to all your tax questions. And most importantly is the last point. The most important thing that you need to remember out of this program is if the numbers don't pencil out, this is not going to save you. This might help you turn a marginal investment into a good investment into a very good investment. It is not going to help you turn a bad investment into a great investment. It's just not. The returns aren't going to pencil out to make that differential work for you. So with that in mind, we're going to have Sean talk about some of the high-level details, and then I'm going to come back and add some more gloss to that.
Thank you, Chris. As he said, I'm really just going to touch on kind of the high level, the rules, what they are, how they work. We're not going to get down in the weeds. You know, we've had some recent IRS regulations that come out that are beginning to address some of the issues that are not clear in the code itself. So we'll touch a little bit on that. So the incentive, it is a tax deferral on invested qualified capital gains, which we're going to talk about that here in just a second. If you invest those qualified gains in a qualified opportunity zone in the way we're going to talk about, the first potential benefit is a 10% reduction on the tax that you would have otherwise paid on that gain when it was originally incurred. If you hold that investment in the zone for 7 years, then you could get an additional 5% reduction in that tax that you would have owned. And as Chris said, if you hold the investment after 10 years, then any appreciation over and above the original gain you invested, you pay no tax on. So in the simple example, I had $1 million gain, I invested in a qualified zone, everything qualifies, I hold it for 10 years, now it's worth $3 million. The $2 million appreciation over and above the original $1 million I put in it, I pay no tax on. So that's the big benefit potentially in the end. So who can benefit? Well, it's individuals, partnerships, S corporations, C corporations, trusts, estates. But ultimately, when you look at this, other than the C corporation, everything typically comes back down to an individual. because your partnership and your S corporations are flow-through entities, so any gains that are taking place there end up on an individual's tax return, is where the tax is paid. The reason we say that partnerships and S corporations can participate in this is because if in that entity it has a gain, which is classified as a capital gain, the partnership itself can choose to make the election to defer by investing in one of these qualified opportunity zones. So they can make the election, and then effectively the individual owner is the beneficiary of that at the end of the day. If the partnership or the S corporation chooses not to make that election at the entity level, the individual still has that opportunity to do so later, because it's deemed to be a capital gain for the individual that owns an interest in the partnership or the S corporation that took place on the last day of the tax year of that partnership or S corporation. And then there's another rule that's a little further in the weeds that you could even choose at the individual investor level to make that election when the original transaction took place in the partnership or their S corp. That's getting a little down in the weeds, but what we're saying is there's a lot of flexibility there with who makes the election at what level. Is it within an entity or is it down at the individual level? So what are qualifying capital gains? We talked about that a little bit already. It can be almost anything as long as, for Internal Revenue Code tax law purposes, it's going to get classified as a capital gain on the tax return. Okay? So that could be I sell my business, I get a $50 million gain, that's going to qualify. If I have a stock portfolio, I wish to diversify, so I sell off a portion of that in which I got a lot of appreciated assets, that's going to qualify. It can be short-term gains or long-term gains. It doesn't matter, they qualify, as long as they're capital gains. So I could have a portfolio of rental properties that I want to get out of and get into something different, as an example that might work in this case. So the investment of the qualified capital gain is the gain itself, not the proceeds. Because you could have a gain of $1 million, but your proceeds were $2 million, just because you had some basis in that already. But it's only that gain portion that's going to qualify for these benefits. So you wouldn't have to put all of your proceeds in from the transaction, just to the extent of the gain itself that would have otherwise been recognized. Structure requirements, and this is where we start getting into the technical requirements, because you have to take that qualified capital gain and invest it in what's called a qualified opportunity fund. And that can be, it's a partnership or a corporation, not an S corporation, a C corporation, that you can create your own. It could be somebody else has set this up and created their own qualified opportunity fund, and they're going to let you invest your capital gain in that. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And we're seeing some national funds being set up where they will probably make investments throughout the country in many different zones. So that's a different type of, or nature of a different qualified opportunity fund that you might see. But a lot of people are going to want to do their own just so that they're in control, because if you get into one of these national funds, you're not going to have any real control over what they're investing in necessarily. So we're probably going to see on a local level, people are going to want to either go into something that a developer has put together or create their own fund to do their own project that they're wanting to move forward with. So when it's an equity investment, so you're either getting a partnership interest or corporate stock in the qualified opportunity fund. So then the fund has a requirement to take those qualified gains that you've invested into that entity and invest those in qualified opportunity zone property or business interests. So timing, and back to what Chris said, there's a 180-day window or clock that starts running the day you trigger that capital gain or have that event that triggers a qualified capital gain. So the 180 days starts ticking. And that can lapse over a tax year in. It doesn't make any difference. You've got the 180 days. And it's literally 180 days. It's not 180 business days. It's not, well, if the 180th day falls on a weekend, I get the next Monday. It doesn't work that way. It's literally 180 days. That's the rule. So then the fund has to go out and invest at least 90% of those amounts that you've put in as qualified capital gain. They have to invest that in qualified opportunity zone property or businesses. And there's a test there in the first half of the year of the qualified opportunity fund. You have to do a test to see if you've invested 90%, and then you have to run the test again at the end of the year. And if you fail that test, then you have to pay a penalty to the IRS to the extent you didn't meet the 90%. It's not an all or nothing, it's to the extent you don't have it invested at the 90% level, then there's a potential penalty that would be owed. So, and it's pretty steep, so it's not something you want to just blow by and say, well, I'll just pay the penalty and get a little more time to get my investment made that I want to do. So the investment, again, it has to be invested into a qualified opportunity zone. In many cases, people are going to structure those as either a direct investment, in other words, I'm going to go buy a specific piece of property. The fund is going to go buy that specific piece of property. Or I may choose to set up a business structure under that. We're not going to get into all the ramifications of that or the different ways you can do it. But keep in mind, there is flexibility. There are choices to be made in how you want to set up and structure your particular project. In some cases, depending on how you structure it, there may be a requirement that if you go in and buy an existing piece of property, you're paying for land, and there may be a structure on that piece of property. To the extent that you've acquired real property that is other than the land, then you have to make a substantial improvement in that, and that's deemed to be an amount equal to at least what you paid for it. So an easy example, if I go out and buy a property for $1 million and the land's worth $600,000 and the building that's sitting on it's worth $400,000, then I have to spend at least another $400,000 to substantially improve that existing property. I don't have to consider the amount allocated to the land that I originally paid for that. And you've only got 31 months to make that happen, to meet that requirement. Qualified business investment. So if it's not necessarily that particular piece of land that you've acquired, but maybe you've invested in a business, which may have some underlying property in it. And there's some tests there that we're not going to get into, a 70% requirement that it remains in the qualified opportunity zone. But they've got some businesses lined out that you can't be creating or continuing in one of these in these opportunity zone businesses. It's what they call the sin businesses. I'm not quite sure why a golf course is a sin, but it's by some definition in the Internal Revenue Code that's a sin business, or country clubs, the racetracks, casinos, liquor stores, we get all that. But anyway, those are some basic limitations in regard to the kinds of things that can be taking place in a business investment through a qualified opportunity fund. Other considerations to keep in mind is that if you have that large capital gain and you invest it in the qualified opportunity fund and then invest in the appropriate property and it's all qualified, you've still got a date at which you will have to pay the tax. And that is December 31st, 2026. In other words, your tax year that includes that date, you're going to have to pay the tax that you would have otherwise paid currently when you had the original gain take place, with the potential for haircuts for the 10% or the 15% total, depending on how long you've held the investment. So even if you continue to own the investment past the 10 years, on this date, December of 26, you're going to have to pay the tax due minus these haircuts potentially. So you're going to need a cash source. So if everything you had was this gain that you put in the deal, then you may have to, at that point, look at some way to raise the funds to pay that tax, whether that be liquidate a portion of your investment, borrow against it, whatever the case may be. There is one thing that's in the rules that some people are questioning, and that is, okay, on that magic date of December of 2026, it's the full amount minus my haircut, right? Well, the way they wrote the rules, it appears if the value of the investment on that date is something less than what you would otherwise have had as a capital gain, then you would only pay the tax on that reduced amount. So if you put in the $1 million and it's only worth $500,000, maybe you only have to pay the tax on the $500,000. Again, there's a lot of rules and guidance here that we're still waiting on from the IRS, but that appears to be one of the provisions in the code as originally written. Another open question we have is, okay, if I don't invest prior to 2021, I don't have enough time to get the 5 years in to get the haircut. Does that mean I never get that 10% haircut on the tax I would have otherwise owned? Well, the way the rules work, it's not really clear, but you would owe the full amount at 2026, and maybe you get some kind of deduction or tax benefit later. Again, it's one of those unanswered questions. Same with the 15% reduction. There's kind of, if you want to be conservative, you would need to invest by those magic dates to make sure you get those haircuts, unless we get further guidance that makes it clear that that's not the case. And then, there's no incentive for putting in more money in excess of that qualified capital gain. So if you had that transaction where you had $1 million of gain, but you really had $2 million of proceeds, sure, you could put your $2 million in it, but that excess over the gain, you're not going to get any tax deferral or any other tax benefit. It's going to be like any other real estate investment you made. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris.
What I really want to get out of the next few slides is a flavor for why opportunity zones are interesting to people in the real estate business. Why are they being thought about? And it's not so much whether you follow the technical, this and that. It's the flavor of it that's the important part. Because they're very appealing in many instances to people with real estate who have sold the real estate and are looking to not pay tax, just like we've been talking about. Defer tax, not pay tax. So, in an opportunity zone, you can get capital gains, as Sean said, from anything. Sell your Amazon stock, capital gain. You can use that money to put it into an opportunity zone. So don't have to find a real estate investment to sell to go into an opportunity zone, whereas if you are in a real estate investment and you sell it, you have to go into another real estate investment. You don't have a choice. You can't say, I'm going to sell my real estate, and I'm not going to pay tax, I'm going to put it in Amazon. It doesn't work that way. Advantage goes to Oz. It's very flexible. You can pretty much do what you want with your own money. Okay. On the other hand, as I said, if you're a real estate person, you've got to find real estate somewhere. It could be raw land, it could be farmland, it could be apartment building, it doesn't matter. It has to be real estate. That could be anywhere in the United States. As you've already heard, an opportunity zone has to be in the zone. Can't be anywhere else. Not in the zone, doesn't work. It has to be in an active trader business, which I mentioned before. You have to, as Sean said, buy it. You have to use it originally. You have to do some things. You can't, as you see in the little blue, do a triple net lease because that would not make it an active trader business. So it's kind of a mixed bag on that. There's some restrictions. Flexibility as a cost, and one of the costs is you're going to have to find an opportunity zone location. One of the things that we've run across right away with investors is that one of the requirements, if you're doing a like-kind exchange, again, not trying to worry about the rules, is you've got a very short period of time, 45 days, to find what properties you might want to roll this into. And you don't have that requirement for an opportunity zone. And that's a pretty big deal, because it might take you a while to figure out if you even want to do an opportunity zone, let alone where it might be. Clearly, advantage for the opportunity zone fund. And this is a fairly big one, and I'm going to take a moment, although it's been touched on a couple of times, this is a really big deal. So again, there's an example here, but if you're in a real estate deal and you sell your property, you've got, if you don't want to pay tax, you've got to put every single dollar into another deal or more. You either have to upscale your investment or move it across, even if you didn't cash out, even if you had to pay off debt to get out of your first investment, and you can see an example there. So a lot of times, you have to come up with your own money if you're really trying to avoid gain. You paid off the bank, you got to have an investment that's at least equal to that amount. You either have to borrow more money or you have to put in additional money because you didn't net enough to match your original investment, or the original sale proceeds. Clear advantage for an opportunity zone. But you don't have to do that. You just only have to put in the gain part. So the same example, you can see you can pocket the $10 of cash that's shown in that example, do something else with it, still get to avoid the entire gain. It's a huge deal for real estate people, and that's why you're seeing so much interest by developers and the like, people in real estate talking about real estate deals. They're more talking about deals than they're talking about acquiring an ice cream business. They're talking about deals because that's, again, a major factor to eliminate their gain or at least defer it. Another item that we've seen that people like a lot is if you want to do a deferred like-kind exchange, for various reasons, you've got to give somebody else your money. called qualified intermediary, and they have to hold it until you're ready to close on your next deal. They have to hold it for maybe up to 6 months. You might guess that they usually charge for that. You don't get to decide what you're doing with it. It's sitting in a bank account somewhere. That's not true for an opportunity zone. You get your transaction, you put your money in your pocket, you walk around for 5.5 months. You don't even have to take it out of the same pocket. You can go to the bank, you have some other money, and there's no tracing. It's got to be that money, and I know exactly where it went. It just has to be the amount of the gain that you're trying to defer. This is a mixed bag, but this is also important to think about the flavor of an opportunity zone. You've heard from me and from Sean that there's a period of time, 2026, you're going to recognize your gain if you're in an opportunity zone. You don't get any choice in that. Borrow your money, raise your money, have the fund distribute your money, you're going to have to pay tax. Even though the investment might warrant continuing to hold and not refinancing, you're going to have to pay the tax. There's no option on that. Whereas if you just roll over into real estate, you hold it forever. Like I said before, it can be an heirloom asset. Give it to your kids. When you die, you never pay tax. Right? Okay? But with an opportunity zone, that's not true. You will pay tax, but the advantage is you might not have to pay tax on the appreciation. And I say you might not. First of all, you have to hold it at least 10 years. Second of all, you have to dispose of it by the 2047. Third of all, you have to be alive. Right? I mean, if you hold real estate and you die, your heirs will get the basis step up and you won't pay tax on that appreciation either. So if you are 90 years old and you've just recognized a significant capital gain and you're planning to live to be 101, that might work for you, but it might not. Because if you did a 1031 rollover transaction and you die, nobody's going to pay tax. Doesn't matter about appreciation. They're not going to pay tax on the original gain. Perfect tax planning, other than your death. With an opportunity zone, though, if you die, you don't get the benefits that we just talked about, and in fact, there will be tax on the gain, the original gain. It'll be considered, it's called income in respect of a decedent. So there's some trade-offs: flexibility, potential permanent avoidance of some of the gain you recognize, potential permanent avoidance of tax on appreciation, but you got to hold it for a while, you got to not die, and you can't really give it to your kids. Bottom line on this slide is we currently think, I'm going to say think, that in an opportunity zone, if you hold it long enough, you'll never have depreciation recapture. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Some people do. Depreciation recapture? That just says you have some potential ordinary income instead of capital gain when you eventually sell. No one likes ordinary income because you pay the tax rates maximum rate on that versus favorable capital gains. So the difference between these two is that in an opportunity zone fund, there is a potential for not having to pick up depreciation recapture. And that's a potential huge, if it manifests itself, huge economic leverage point. That means, for example, you might be able to put your gain, your $5 million into a fund, have them buy property, depreciate it, pass the depreciation on to you, sell the property for $5 million, and not pay any recapture tax. And if you talk to your tax advisors, they're going to get all happy and excited about that. And we're not entirely sure that's the rule, but we think that that's the rule. And that's a huge advantage for an opportunity zone. This last slide is showing you something I want to talk about a little bit more, showing you fish jumping out and in midair between a comfort zone and an opportunity zone. And there's a reason for that. I have them in midair. And that's because there are an enormous amount of questions that were not answered 3 weeks ago by the regulations, probably won't be answered by the end of the year when they issue the next round of regulations, that make what you're jumping into a potential huge unknown. Not necessarily bad deal, but, and I'll give you, there are some examples as written that we don't know if Congress intended it to say what it says. I said earlier, I said it twice, you have to be involved in an active trade or business. Can't do a triple net management company kind of situation. And that's not actually completely true. That's just what we think Congress intended. Literally, the way the statute's written, you could structure an opportunity zone fund to do just what I just said. Literally buy something, lease it, triple net lease, take advantage of all the benefits. Why aren't we talking about that then? It's because no one really thinks that they intended for that to happen, and we suspect, although no one has said, that they will fix that in technical corrections. So in the meantime, how much do you want to gamble on this benefit that that's going to be the case? Some will say, I want to put it all on red. Some are going to say, no, let's take the more conservative approach. Multiple times, every one of us has said, potential is to never pay tax on the appreciation of your investment. Technically, that's not completely clear. They will probably clarify how these rules work, but if you're in a partnership or an LLC right now, they completely ignored how Subchapter K, which is the partnership rules, actually work in this context. And it is possible, we've given advice to clients that it is possible when you sell your investment, yes, you'll pay, you theoretically sold your investment for the basis that equals the value, but you ended up recognizing some ordinary income and capital loss that theoretically offset each other, but in fact don't. As you all may know, that's a bad combination, ordinary income and capital loss. That's a possibility under these regulations. Congress also didn't really think about the market realities of owning corporate stock. The statute says if you sell your stock 10 years from now for no gain, no tax, that's true, except how many of you have ever tried to sell a corporation, a C corporation, for example, that has appreciated assets inside of it? The buyer doesn't want to buy the stock. The buyer wants to buy the assets, doesn't want to buy the stock. Because the buyer wants to be able to appreciate the assets based on the purchase price. Can't do that when you buy stock. So what happens? How do stock deals get done? You negotiate a price that's lower than the value of the stock to represent the deferred taxes that the buyer would have to pay if they bought the stock. So effectively, you end up getting less for your stock. That's not intended, but there's no process under the statute, just as an example, to fix that. So there are a number of things that are unknown, uncertain, but if you've got gains and you've got the 180-day clock ticking and you have a shovel-ready investment that you want to go into, we absolutely can design a structure that will get you the best that we think you can get, at least at this time. And that's why you're in midair, but water looks good, and there's going to be a lot of people jumping.
Thank you, Chris and Sean. So there are challenges to the opportunity zones that I think are important to discuss, because we've talked a lot about what is possible, and a lot of optimism. Stephen Rosenthal with the Tax Policy Center pointed out that the fundamental problem with this program is the disconnect between the size of potential tax costs, because these are capital gains taxes that are not going to the Treasury, and the social benefits of the investment, which is part of the intent of this program. Social investment benefits are really hard to measure, so in 10 years we may not really know the true impact of this program in that sense. There, as Chris pointed out, there's a lot of uncertainty in the statutes. We're still early in the process. Everybody's still learning. On the way here, I got an email with another article updating about opportunity zones. There's something new every day, so we're still learning. The timeline, there's a limited window for dispersing capital. Anybody involved in neighborhood development, urban redevelopment, downtown development here, the first step is getting site control, lining up funding, getting contractors, getting lending. If you're doing incentives, getting through the public process to get TIF approved or to get tax credit application approved, to get it certified as a historic structure, if you go that route. All of these things add time to a complex development. So are there ways we can accelerate that through the city and the entitlement process? That's something to look at. Projects still need to pencil out. They need to make sense at the end of the day, because most investors will want to see some level of return. Like I said, redevelopment projects are complex, and some concern is displacing residents in some of these neighborhoods, gentrification. Sometimes if market changes are accelerated, the neighborhood turns over really fast and longtime residents are forced out. And there are tools to address that, but it is a challenge in a lot of redeveloping markets. So, how are communities preparing? I'm talking about 6 different things we looked into. There are developments underway funded by Opportunity Zones already, Opportunity Zone funds. I want to talk about a few national opportunity funds that are investing in different things. There's also missional opportunity funds, which it's a concept of impact investing, which really marries philanthropy and investment, where people might accept a lower return to do some social good. A lot of communities are developing a prospectus where they present to investors their focus areas, why invest in this instance Louisville or Louisville, if you're from there, and what projects are available for Opportunity Zone Fund investment. Birmingham, Alabama is really kind of looking at things a different way, and I'll get into that. And other communities are holding events and tours for funds and developers and so forth. So just a few developments underway, 3 different types, kind of a mid-scale. You can picture this building. You know, we have some that look like this here. Mixed-use redevelopments. They cost a lot to redevelop. That's underway in August, Maine with a few different capital partners. And some of these are funded in whole by an equity, in whole with equity from an Opportunity Zone fund. In LA, this much bigger project, probably a market rate project, in a mixed use downtown style, 452 unit apartment building, a joint venture between a couple of equity firms. In DC, this was more of a neighborhood scale project. And Fundrise, which I'll talk about in a second, you know, this is a neighborhood scale development. Some of the funds that are out there who are already active and raising capital, Virtua Partners, they're targeting to raise $200 million to invest nationally in single family, which would be single family rental, multifamily housing, and some hotels. You know, some of that you can see at a neighborhood scale, and others more downtown appropriate. Fundrise is an online trading platform that is raising they hope to raise $500 million. They are investing nationally and focusing on commercial and residential real estate. They already provide equity and loans for a variety of projects. And I was looking at that while preparing for this presentation. Like, I can go invest $5,000 in a multifamily rehab in Washington, D.C. You can pick which project. It's really interesting in this, you know, evolving era with technology. Maxis Properties is out of Kansas City. They're raising $500 million to invest in multifamily housing, and they're actually looking for projects that are even currently under construction, which isn't quite the intent of the program. The program wants to spur new development, but if it's under construction, it's still not worth much, so you can still meet that basis requirement. But they're looking actively for properties to purchase. Some of the missional funds, which kind of marry investment with social justice. Emergent Communities Fund, they're looking at downtown redevelopment in small cities and towns. In Kansas, some of the smaller cities, their downtowns are opportunity zones, like Salina, for instance. One of their partners, Rivermont Capital, specializes in going in undervalued downtowns and adding value over a long period of time. Access Ventures Fund, they invest in hipsters. Anybody? No? Okay. So they're looking at small operating businesses. So they're looking more at a micro scale, having impact with helping businesses succeed. The Detroit Opportunity Fund it's also a crowdfunded fund that is focusing on multi-housing and small business startups in Detroit. It just got started. They aren't quite sure where they're going, but they're trying to raise capital to do something big in Detroit. The Community Prospectus, there's a few examples out there. They do an overview of a lot of the statistics the partnership here uses to market the community to businesses, talk about growth. They identify investable projects. So they know some projects that are investable today to attract that capital. They focus on human capital as well, connecting people to jobs and creating neighborhood community wealth creation, which is important in the zones. They also try to link placemaking, reknitting the urban fabric, which we've been talking about with the city through the Places for People program, is making the urban areas reflect urban form again. And also, capacity building. This is where foundations come in to help build the capacity of the community. So this is an example of what's in their prospectus. Data and charts, fun stuff, maps, and kind of priority projects with the capital needs and institutional and infrastructure supports. In Birmingham, the new mayor ran on this platform of innovation and economic opportunity. So he's really leveraging this and leading it from the mayor's office to be a hub of qualified and diverse talented support small businesses, startups, propelling shared prosperity and inclusive growth. And the way they're leveraging opportunity zones is organizing their incentives around these areas, making it a little easier for people to see what's possible and a capital stack for a project or the different funding sources. They're coordinating. There's a state nonprofit in Alabama. It's the only state who's done this so far. They created a state to interface with the different funds and investors and developers to try to link them with projects that meet their criteria. And then just align it all with different policies and bring everything together where it's clear how you can invest in a project in an opportunity zone. And the final example in Erie, Ohio, but they have an investment opportunity. They hosted developers and investment and fund representatives for a 600-acre site along the riverfront that's in an opportunity zone. This is more the business and economic development piece of this program. They even did boat tours to kind of just show the site. So they brought people in to show off their community and what site is ripe for development. So thinking about preparing your local community, there needs to be leadership. There needs to be somebody leading the charge. In Birmingham, it was the mayor's office. In a lot of cities, it's the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Network that are leading the charge. So it's about defining community priorities, which we've understood some of those more through Project Wichita recently. Identifying strategic projects. An example of that is in Project Downtown Plan, the catalyst sites, or looking at having a menu of business investments. What are some businesses that are looking to expand or open or grow? Would they be willing to have operations in an opportunity zone? Even though a lot of that would be confidential, but somebody having that available to go to a fund and say, hey, we have some opportunity for you here if this matches your criteria. Focus areas or districts, you find a district that you want to focus on within an opportunity zone. This gets into kind of the strategic planning that we do a lot of. And finally, actively market Wichita, market the projects we have, and help assemble the capital needed. Be proactive instead of waiting for it to come here, because there's going to be a lot of competition for these funds. Markets like Denver, Dallas, what are some other Ds that are doing really well? Denver, Dallas, Dover. Is Dover killing it? But those markets, a lot of the developers have a pipeline of projects they could start now or soon. So they can go to a fund and say, I need $100 million. I can start 3 projects in the next 6 months. I don't think we have that here yet. It would be great to have 1 or 2. But working together to identify those and having an entity or a person out there leading the charge. So conclusion, that's kind of that diagram showed what I'm thinking would be a strategic approach here. I broke it down a little bit further. I think there's 6 key stakeholder groups. So civic and institutional leaders, this is our city officials, mayor. This is the partnership and downtown group. This is Wichita State and Newman and friends who are active in trying to grow our economy. The philanthropic community, we have a lot of social service agencies and foundations that do a lot of investment in our community to expand capacity, grow the labor force, help people improve their skills to have jobs. The business community, nobody knows better about what business investments would help them grow than the business community, the business owners. So we need them involved. Investors, of course, there are local investors setting up funds. They're going to have specific projects they want to invest in, and what would make, it would be helpful to understand what would make an investment attractive to them. The development community, developers, the development team, when you get the attorneys and accountants and contractors and architects. And then neighborhood groups, because as we showed earlier, a lot of these are neighborhoods in the north and south Wichita. We need to understand what the community is experiencing, what priority projects they have that might meet the criteria, and have not come in a top-down way and say, I want to develop this in your neighborhood, but say, what's going on in your neighborhood and how can we partner with you to help meet the goals of the neighborhood. So I kind of touched on this a little bit because I got going, forgot to push the button. But the philanthropic community, in some places they're providing seed funding, matching funds for projects or studies or implementation plans or community engagement or capacity building for organizations or for individuals, and a lot of social services that help people improve their lives so they can fill jobs. We have a lot of job openings that go unfilled. The civic and institutional leaders, we've had a lot longer list here, but align some policies to make all of this easier. Target incentives and make it clear which ones are available in the zones. Coordinate infrastructure improvements with planned development in the zones. Helping to identify catalyst projects again. Market the city, market the zones, market the projects. Help with the, WCU Tech is doing a ton to help with workforce development. That's really exciting, but that needs to be on the forefront. Technology, one of our goals as a region is to recruit tech. So can we create a tech hub or a better ecosystem where technology companies can find the workers they need to grow here instead of having to move elsewhere. Streamline entitlements, that make the zoning process easier, is really, so there's certainty up front for a development that I don't have to go through a 6-month PUD or CIP process. Let's say, okay, this project is allowed in the opportunity zone. We can get that approved in 45 days instead of 180. And then, we need to find community goals and see what projects align with those and have it all come together. Business community, your capital needs. You know what your expansion plans and goals are and what your space and real estate needs are. Some of this could be met in the opportunity zones and attract this capital. And then neighborhood groups help us identify priority projects, make some connections with people who can help and make connections to job centers and so forth. What infrastructure would help the communities thrive? And we can do this in a way that enhances neighborhood character. A lot of these areas were built before the 40s, the walkable city, before cars became most common form of transportation. Can we return them to the original character and form where they're more unique places and restore the urban form? And investors, what are your targets? Who are partners you would work with? And how much money is available? That's important to know. Some communities already know this to a certain extent. Funds are still being made, being created, and so forth. And the development community, one way developers are out there saying, I have a project to invest in. So what projects are you trying to work on that you think you could start in the next 12 to 18 months or sooner to meet some of these longer term timelines? There's what are the funding needs to make it work? Deal making, there could be some really creative deal making, which some developers enjoy, some don't. And what development team do you need in place to make these projects go through? And so all of these, the point of this diagram is just to show all of these have some sort of relation and connection to approach this in a holistic way. Some as a direct connection and some as a kind of a soft connection. But it's about coordinating capacity in order to maximize impact. Now, you don't really have to do all this. This is just my thought of a strategic approach based on the work we do. We can still get investments that developer A does over here and developer B does over here, but we can have more capital flow to Wichita and have more projects that are meaningful if we work together in this way. So going back to this diagram, let's define community priorities, identify strategic projects, match projects with investors, and this is kind of the final thing. Bruce Katz and Evan Weiss wrote this policy brief called From Transactions to Transformation, how cities can maximize opportunity zones. They give 10 steps, and all of these may not apply here, but the first one is investment prospectus. How can you market yourself to these funds as a community? Maximize economic impact of anchor institutions, universities. We know the universities here are really engines that drive innovation and new ideas. Maximize impact of public assets. So this is like when we do a public improvement project, how do we leverage development off of that? Accelerate employment density. I'm not quite sure what they mean. It sounds good, but I'm not quite sure what they mean there. And invest in high quality infrastructure when you're doing projects in the opportunity zones. That is one thing that makes, in some areas, developers more comfortable, is when a city's investing in its infrastructure, people are more willing to invest in the real estate. Align the city investments and policies with distinct opportunity zone assets. Not each opportunity zone is different, so each one's distinct. So each one has a different flavor and investment potential. So opportunity zone by Wichita State should be a lot different than the one downtown, but there's different investors looking for different things, so they might be attracted to that neighborhood versus downtown. And support entrepreneurs and developers. That is part of the intent of this program. Global labor market skills, making sure people can fill the jobs that might come with expansions and new investment. Produce and preserve affordable workforce housing, because people need a place to live near their job. And then, one of the things they're talking about repurposing or creating new institutions. They're big on kind of rethinking how we operate the civic side and the governments. Is there a way to do that as part of this process to make things easier for everyone moving forward? And with that, I have one last quote that, the promise of this program is to inspire cities to re-examine and rediscover the fundamentals of economic development by challenging the resources of their own community. And cities who are able to coordinate and focus the investment are the ones who can reposition themselves for long success and also attract the most investment from these capital sources. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you for coming, and thank you again for Jacob for pulling this together. Thank you, Chris and Sean, for sharing your insight. The question was, if I put $1 million into an opportunity zone fund, can I refinance that building and cash out? When?
5 days after I close.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Can I borrow the money out? Probably so, right?
Yes, but the problem with that is, can you hear me okay? The problem with that is that the fund has to have 90% of its assets in trade or business type assets. It can't have all of its money in a loan to you. That won't qualify. So your example might work if you can meet the 90% test, other than your loan.
That's a big negative.
The question was, are there securities law concerns if you're trying to get investors? And the answer is yes. There's no element of this that's not subject to the normal securities law concerns.
The city worked with the state to identify the opportunity zones, and my understanding is they tried to balance the criteria of low-income census tract with also having businesses. Part of it is you want distressed areas that have potential because of the investment side of the program. So in a lot of cities, the worst off, the most challenged neighborhoods weren't selected. It was kind of adjacent to areas that are seeing momentum or already have some investment going. But that's how it was done. The census tracts were submitted to the state, and the state chose which one to submit to the Big Brother.
Are they set forever now?
They're set for now.
They were set in March of this year.
So I can actually help with that. And in District 1, we set the opportunity zones where we needed affordable housing. That was how we set the Wichita statement. They submitted, but I recommended all the places where we need help with housing. Because we have a lot of areas with those, we have a lot of empty lots. That's kind of the number one focus there. I'm Brandon Johnson, by the way.
So the question was, after you invest in one fund and you decide you want to put some of that money in another fund, can you do that? Is it portable? Chris thinks the answer is yes, and you don't have to put it all in the same fund. The question is, if you own land in a zone and want to use this program to build on that land, can you hold on to the land and be involved in the development, or are you left out of it?
So, maybe. This is one of those, I can answer that question the way the statute's written. That's not the intent. You could structure something that would, for example, under the statute right now, if the land is vacant right now, so under the statute you could set up a fund of your own. First of all, you could always sell it to somebody else, but that's not what you're asking. You can also sell it to somebody who you own less than 20%. That's not a problem. But if you're trying to sell it to yourself, then the only way to make that happen currently that I'm aware of is you have to lease the land to the fund that you set up. You might be able to contribute the land, which won't qualify as a contribution, and in either case you can't count the land for purposes, the land will count in the denominator of the 90% test. And so you'll have to significantly improve it, all assets. So the answer is you might be able to do that as currently prepared, but that's one of the questions that people are asking, the right of the fund to lease property from a related party, which is what this is. I understand. The question is whether you can have the underlying ground come from a related party and still qualify. And right now they think literally yes, but that's a question that's being worked on. And we have people asking that question all the time. That's a question that will be answered.